President Donald Trump just said the U.S. has not necessarily been focused on this country and trade. Also, he says the United States may not reach a negotiated trade deal with Canada. Trump said today, as he was leaving for Scotland, suggested his administration could set a tariff rate unilaterally, saying, quote, "We haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. I think Canada could be one where there's just a tariff, not really a negotiation."
The trade battlefield ahead of the August 1st deadline. August the 1st is approaching like an unforgiving countdown clock. And amidst the barrage of mixed messages, a statement from former United States President Donald Trump has once again stirred anxiety in international trade circles. Canada might not require negotiation, just tariffs. Trump said before departing Washington for Scotland. This remark not only caught the attention of analysts, but also raised a crucial question. Is this a psychological tactic to pressure Canada, or the beginning of a new trade war? While the White House releases bold and confrontational messages, Canadian negotiators remain remarkably calm. Ambassador Kirsten Hillman and Minister Dominic LeBlanc, who has been handling the trade portfolio, made clear declarations from Washington. We will not accept a bad deal. We will only sign when the agreement is right for Canadian workers. This is not merely a statement of trade principle, but a political message for domestic audiences. Ottawa will not yield under Washington's pressure. Simultaneously, former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney has been preparing the public. It is entirely possible that Canada may pass the August deadline without reaching a deal. As such, the government has begun implementing support measures for vulnerable industries, creating a cushion while extending the negotiation runway. On the surface, Trump's confrontational language may seem like an indicator of deteriorating relations, but upon closer analysis, it reveals something more subtle. What Trump is voicing is not entirely inconsistent with what Canadian officials are anticipating. In fact, his words reinforce the reality that both sides are playing a calculated game, every move made with strategic intent. Canada is not the only country facing pressure from the Trump administration. Both Japan and the United Kingdom were forced into rushed negotiations, only to later discover that their deals largely existed on social media and in press conferences without any binding documentation. And Canada is watching that playbook very carefully. The bigger question looms. If Canada signs prematurely just to dodge tariffs, what happens when the official review of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, or CUSMA in Canada, begins in the year 2026? Will today's concessions become leverage points for further demands down the line? Caught between the threat of a 35% tariff and a firm stance to avoid an unfair agreement, the question remains, who will blink first? And what is the true long game each side is pursuing? Key developments, rising tensions and quiet negotiations. Amidst political distraction, while Trump tours Scotland, a silent trade chess match continues between Washington and Ottawa. Conversations, briefings, and behind-the-scenes lobbying persist, every word and gesture a piece on the board. Speaking to the press before his European departure, Trump bluntly stated, "We haven't had much luck with Canada. They might be a case for just a tariff, not a negotiation." The timing of this remark was far from coincidental as the August deadline looms, and bilateral talks still yield no concrete results. In contrast, Canada maintains composure. Ambassador Hillman and Minister Dominic LeBlanc have spent days in Washington engaging with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutino and several Republican senators. Despite LeBlanc's description of these meetings as productive and constructive, there remains no clear sign of an imminent deal. Hillman emphasizes that Canada seeks a good deal, not a quick one. Meanwhile, Carney publicly reassures citizens that it is acceptable to miss the deadline. Support packages for affected sectors are already being rolled out, extending Canada's flexibility at the table. Moreover, Canadian businesses can still benefit from tariff exemptions under the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, provided proper documentation and origin requirements are met. This mitigates the scope of the threatened 35% tariff. The actual impact would fall primarily on goods not covered under the agreement. However, industries like steel, aluminum, and softwood lumber already under U.S. punitive tariffs remain highly vulnerable. These sectors are at the heart of Canada's current negotiations with the U.S. Commerce Department. Trump's strategy is familiar: intensify pressure, then offer incremental relief. It worked with Japan and the United Kingdom, but both countries learned that fast deals with Washington often lacked clarity or enforceable commitments. In Japan's case, the U.S. claimed a $500 billion investment fund, while Tokyo insisted the agreement was limited to loan guarantees. Such discrepancies in deals not formally signed are precisely what Canada seeks to avoid. The Canadian approach values signed texts, legal clarity, and accountability mechanisms. Hence, while maintaining dialogue, Ottawa is not rushing to seal an ambiguous agreement. Trump's remark that, for many countries, the letter will be the deal, underscores his administration's informality in trade policymaking. Even a tweet or verbal statement may become a pretext for imposing tariffs. When asked about the chances of a deal with the European Union, another unresolved file, Trump placed the odds at 50-50. This unpredictability highlights a broader pattern: no clear texts, no fixed timeline, just flexible threats. With Trump retaining total control, in this context, Canada is not merely navigating a bilateral dispute, but confronting a larger U.S. trade doctrine. The question now is whether Ottawa's patient resistance can hold, or whether it will be cornered by escalating unpredictability. Strategic analysis: why Canada refuses to rush a deal. While other nations scramble for trade agreements to avoid punitive tariffs, Canada has taken a markedly different route, measured, calculated, and steadfast. This begs the question: why is Ottawa not in panic mode? Despite the looming threat of severe trade repercussions starting August the 1st, the answer can be summarized in one word: leverage. Thanks to its participation in the trilateral United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, known in Canada as CUSMA, Ottawa possesses a degree of legal insulation. Under this framework, the majority of Canadian exports to the United States remain tariff-free, provided they comply with origin certification and paperwork requirements. In essence, if Canadian businesses meet the agreement's criteria, they are shielded from the threatened 35% tariff. This built-in advantage grants Canada the luxury of patience. Unlike countries such as Japan or the United Kingdom, which lack a formal bilateral agreement with the United States, Canada negotiates from a position of institutional strength. Its strategy is not reactive, it is defensive by design. That said, the entire economy is not immune. Key sectors such as steel, aluminum, and softwood lumber continue to suffer from unilateral U.S. tariffs. These areas remain the focal point of current negotiations. Still, Ottawa is not rushing and has instead signaled readiness by deploying support packages for vulnerable industries, thereby buying valuable time at the negotiating table. Canadian negotiators are also keenly observing how Washington has handled deals with other nations. Japan's experience is particularly instructive. The Trump administration publicly touted a $500 billion investment fund, while Japanese officials clarified that only loan guarantees were agreed upon. With no signed documents, the discrepancy in interpretations turned into diplomatic friction. Canada, a nation deeply rooted in legal tradition and multilateralism, cannot afford such ambiguities. It requires signed agreements, clear terms, and enforceable clauses. This explains why Ambassador Hillman and Minister LeBlanc, despite signaling optimism, have refrained from making hasty commitments. Looking ahead to the year 2026, when the USMCA is set for review, Canada is acutely aware that any concession now could weaken its position in the next round. A premature deal today may embolden U.S. negotiators to demand more tomorrow. Furthermore, Prime Minister Mark Carney has introduced a parallel diplomatic initiative, proposing a joint security and economic agreement with the United States. This move seeks to highlight Canada's strategic value not just as a trade partner, but also as a defense and security ally. The goal is to differentiate Canada from Mexico within the USMCA framework and secure preferential treatment in future negotiations. In this context, Canada's refusal to rush is not a sign of weakness, but a long-game strategy rooted in legal, economic, and diplomatic prudence. The Tariff Dilemma, from steel to autos and the 35% threat. When Donald Trump threatened to impose a 35% tariff on Canadian goods starting August the 1st, many dismissed it as a bluff. However, for those who follow U.S. trade law, the threat is very real and entirely within the president's authority. At the heart of this authority lies the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, EPA, enacted in the year 1977. This statute enables the president to impose economic restrictions, including tariffs, in response to perceived national security threats. Though designed for emergencies, it has been repeatedly used to justify sweeping trade actions. Legal challenges to such executive powers have largely failed. U.S. courts have sided with presidential authority, allowing past tariffs on steel, aluminum, and automotive imports to stand. This legal backdrop means that the threat of a new 35% tariff is not just rhetoric, it is a tangible risk. What makes this scenario even more concerning is its compounding effect. A new tariff would stack on top of existing duties, creating a cumulative economic strain, particularly on Canadian cities like Oshawa, Windsor, and St. Catharines, where the automotive industry is vital. The ripple effects would not be limited to Canada. Numerous U.S. states, including Michigan and New York, depend heavily on cross-border trade and supply chains. Still, political calculus appears to be prevailing over economic logic. Trump, preparing for another potential election campaign, is once again adopting a strong negotiator persona, using tariffs as leverage regardless of mutual cost. This places Canadian negotiators in a precarious position. While Minister LeBlanc and Commerce Secretary Lutino have engaged in cordial talks, the final decision rests with Trump, and his unpredictability has forced Canada to prepare for both a negotiated settlement and a worst-case tariff scenario. Ambassador Hillman has reiterated that Canada will not sign a deal at any cost. Prime Minister Carney and provincial premiers have echoed this, creating a unified national front. But unity does not eliminate vulnerability. Should Trump follow through with the tariff threat, sectors not covered under USMCA, such as softwood lumber and agricultural exports, will be the first casualties. And once trust in the existing trade framework erodes, rebuilding cross-border economic confidence will be an uphill battle. The role of key figures when Trump is the final decider in what should have been a procedural trade negotiation. Personal leadership styles have dramatically influenced the trajectory, and no one illustrates this better than Donald Trump. Throughout his presidency, Trump elevated personal influence over institutional consensus. Now, in the Canadian trade file, he is once again making it clear he alone will decide whether a deal is signed. Despite conciliatory messages from U.S. officials like Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick and United States Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, Trump consistently returns to the stage with forceful statements that contradict internal progress. While talks between LeBlanc and Lutnick are described as productive, Trump publicly states that we haven't had much luck with Canada and that tariffs may be imposed without negotiation. Christopher Sands, director of the Center for Canadian Studies at Johns Hopkins University, offered a clear interpretation. The president wants to say, "Don't forget me. I'm the one who makes the final call." Sands added that heightened rhetoric may actually signal a nearing agreement. "It's always darkest before the dawn," he remarked. Yet for Canada, this volatility is a strategic challenge. Ottawa's negotiation style favors consistency, legal certainty, and multilateralism, the exact opposite of Trump's instinct-driven, real estate-style bargaining. Reading his intentions requires constant caution and preparation for sudden shifts. In contrast, Canadian leadership has shown unified resolve. Ambassador Hillman reinforced that Canada would not accept a weak agreement just to avoid tariffs. Minister LeBlanc has remained highly visible in Washington, signaling active engagement. At home, Prime Minister Mark Carney and provincial premiers have echoed the same message, a firm, united national position. This consistency is not without strategy. By aligning domestic and international messaging, Canada sends a clear signal. It is negotiating from a place of principle, not panic. Nevertheless, Trump remains the signature authority, regardless of the groundwork laid by Lutnick, Greer, or even the Treasury Department. No agreement is valid without Trump's approval. And as he gears up for another political campaign, making bold moves against trade partners may serve his electoral narrative. Meanwhile, Carney is positioning Canada on a broader playing field. His proposal for a parallel security and economic pact with the United States is more than symbolic. It signals that Canada is not just a trade ally, but also a strategic partner in defense, intelligence, and border cooperation, differentiating itself from Mexico within the trilateral framework. Ultimately, in this high-stakes game, the pen that signs the deal or the tariff order still rests in Trump's hand, and he has proven he is willing to wield it, with or without consensus. What comes next? USMCA, security pacts, and the dual chessboard. As August the 1st approaches, the real question is not whether a deal will be reached, but rather, what path will Canada and the United States take beyond that date? Officially, the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, is scheduled for review in the year 2026. This process begins with a meeting of the Free Trade Commission comprising trade ministers from all three countries, tentatively planned for September or October. Once convened, it will launch a fresh phase of negotiations, possibly leading to amendments or renewals. Anticipating this, Prime Minister Carney has proposed a supplemental security and economic agreement with the United States. The objective: to frame Canada not merely as a trade partner, but as a trusted ally in defense, cybersecurity, and border management. This strategic repositioning may help Canada secure more favorable treatment in upcoming USMCA discussions. On the U.S. side, Trump's tariff threats may not only reflect trade frustrations but also serve as a litmus test for strategic loyalty. By linking economic cooperation with security alignment, the administration is testing its partners' overall value proposition. This is the dual chessboard. Canada finds itself on one board for trade, another for security. If Canada capitulates now with a weak deal, it risks undermining its credibility in future talks. Any concession made today could be cited as precedent when USMCA renegotiations formally begin. Thus, holding firm is not merely about resisting immediate pressure, it is about preserving leverage. Moreover, Canada is wary of repeating the mistakes of countries that rushed into vague agreements with the Trump administration, without written terms, enforceable clauses, and formal ratification. Such deals can unravel within weeks. By insisting on legal clarity and avoiding symbolic agreements, Canada is betting on long-term stability over short-term relief. In doing so, it is asserting its role not as a junior partner under duress, but as a sovereign nation playing the long game in a volatile international order, holding the line or falling behind. For months now, Canada has stood its ground, declining to yield under pressure, refusing to rush a deal, and preparing contingencies for a no-deal scenario. This isn't just strategy. It's resolve. Trump, ever the negotiator, has meanwhile remained unpredictable. But the limits of this approach are increasingly evident. In a globalized world of interdependence, trust and transparency often matter more than short-term leverage. The looming question: will Canada's firmness pay off, or will it leave the country exposed to punitive tariffs and strained bilateral ties? The answer depends on more than immediate outcomes. It hinges on whether Canada can leverage its legal frameworks, diplomatic alliances, and reputation as a reliable partner to withstand temporary storms. One thing is clear: August the 1st is not the end, it is merely an inflection point. Whether it leads to a renewed understanding or an escalation in trade tensions, both countries will need to recalibrate. The next chapters will unfold not just at the negotiating table, but across industries, borders, and political landscapes. As Ambassador Hillman wisely noted, there is a time when the right deal is the one worth waiting for. Canada, it seems, is prepared to wait, and more importantly, to negotiate on its own terms